when I was about 15 years old, I went to my pastor and I said, I have this sense that I would like to do something full-time in the church. And he looked at me like I had six heads. And he wanted to respond, but he really didn't know. And he said, well, I think you could be a deaconess. I'd seen one deaconess in my life, and this is no reflection, but as a 15-year-old, the way she was dressed and her age and nothing, kind of hit of saying, Jean can do this. And he said, well, the other thing would be you become a missionary. I thought, gosh, I never did real well at summer camp. How am I going to go overseas for 4 years? I'd never been out of the country. So I didn't think, I just thought, well, it's just not going to be. And then life intervened and I taught school for a year, third grade. So that could have been my direction. I always knew I wanted to teach. And I hope that I've always made a part of my pastoral ministry is very much being the teaching pastor. And I actually served 15 years as a lay professional in the church. So I served in that way in 15 years prior to being ordained. So it was kind of like, should I do this? Yet somehow the church kept calling. I know we've got this threefold call. And I knew for sure that God had always called me to serve in the church. And I was doing that. But the church at large kept calling. And the place where I was serving kept calling because I was at that time on the seminary faculty. The only woman on any seminary faculty in the whole LCA. So we started ordaining women, and we had no women on our seminary faculties. So all these women are coming to seminary, and they had no models among the faculty except male. Now this is full-time. Some of the seminaries were starting to bring in part-time. But I joined the seminary faculty in 1971, non-ordained at the time, and was the only woman for any of the seminaries. So I had this role of speaking for or being with. And so we did inter-seminary things where I could help to teach and talk and show them that women could do these things. And so then finally, here was God was calling and the church was calling, and finally it was up to me to say, yes, this is what you've prepared me for, Lord. And so it moved in a very gradual, wonderful way. I was ordained on November the 14th, 1976. At First Lutheran Church. And this was the first ordination of a woman by the Virginia Synod. And it was the first ordination of President Moyer, later Bishop Moyer. And he said he thought that was rather significant that his ministry was starting. He had just been elected, and his first ordination was going to be that of a woman. Service was really a glorious service. Later, at the time, Secretary of the Church, National Church or Churchwide, was Jim Crumley, and later was Bishop Crumley. So he was my preacher. Secretary of the Church. He was retiring that year, beloved in the Senate. So there were lots of different things. It also was an ordination that represented the whole church because we had parish congregational representatives, we had seminary, we had churchwide in Jim Crumley, and also in one of my sponsors was from the seminary faculty, and one of my sponsors was that was Phil Hefner, and Bob Bacher was from Churchwide. So,
and that's First Lutheran in Norfolk.
in Norfolk, yes, yes.
Wow, how about that?
Well, the Norfolk paper made a big deal of this. And so, usually the church doesn't get too much publicity, but they really did a great big article. Now they did some very sexist things, like they called attention to the fact that I had blue eyeshadow that matched my eyes. Now they would have never done that for a guy, but they did.
Right.
A few things like that. My ordination, I believe, and I think this is for women and men, but I think first of all that we as women are created in the image of God. We've got that in Genesis, that's who we are, as the created children of God. And then in Galatians, I began to read, and the first emphasis from the church was this, that Galatians 3:28, all are one in Jesus Christ. There's neither male nor female. Well, now that sounded really good, but I discovered that we really needed to start with 27, and I don't know why we didn't. But 3:27, as many of you as were baptized into Christ have put on Christ. Now, to me, that image of God, my being, my created being, and my being clothed were the two transforming things that talked about me as an ordained pastor. Now, others will hear that in different ways. I don't mean that everybody who, I think this is true for us in all of our vocation, but for me, those were the kind of jump out at me things of saying, God created this human being, God baptized me, and God gave the gifts that's me. And I can't believe that God said, oh, but I really didn't mean it.
Right.
This is you, this is who, and this is what I created you to be. So I was ordained to a call at the seminary faculty.
Got it.
Which then meant that I was the first ordained woman to ever serve on any Lutheran faculty, and I was the only ordained woman at any seminary. And soon after that, I was elected to the church-wide Division for Professional Leadership. And somehow I was elected chair at my first meeting, which meant that was the first time a woman ever served a church-wide committee, professional committee, or any of our managing committees at the time.
As one who has come after you, I give thanks to God for those firsts, Jean. Your embodying those firsts has helped make it possible for me to live and embody the whatever of ordained women in ministry that I am. And so I give thanks to you and to God's work in and through you.
Well, thank you. And I do give great thanks, because I know that we were not hatched out of nothing.
Right.
And that there were mothers and grandmothers, and I could name so many women in history of the church who fought for this, or who made a role for this, or who served in a variety of roles that were not ordained roles at that time, but they led the way, or they opened the doors that then let other things happen.
Right.
Well, January 7th this year, Pastor Mims and I were over at the church, and we were trying to set up for some shots of the church while it was still decorated and the trees up and all this. So we were changing paraments, and we were doing all kinds of things. And I picked up, and I looked at my hands, and I said, I was starting to go light the candles. And I said, I was baptized in this church. I grew up at this church. My brother and my cousins were all acolytes. This is the first time, January 7th, 2021, in which I went to light the candles in my home church. Now,
Wow.
that sounds like no big deal.
No.
But somehow we always said to the little girls, you're not the same as the boys.
Mm-hmm.
You can't do this. And now we say, God created all of you.
Right.
And you can all, you know. So it's not just lighting the candles, it is the fullness and the wholeness of the people of God. And if God created us that way, then why not that God would call us? So that's being in the position that I was with the seminary and with the church at large. It just opened some doors. I went to England, and they didn't have ordained women at that time, and they were struggling with it. And so they called on me to speak at different groups. Present what this had meant for our church. And that was in 1977. So I was only ordained a year, but there it was. And I've preached in Tanzania and Korea and Japan. And I've done the sacraments in those places.
Right.
Long before they had that opportunity to know that in women.
Yeah, so, CP&G had not yet at that point, but have since voted to ordain women. But the pastors who were there that we were traveling with and the presiding bishop wanted to make sure that I preached while I was there.
Yeah.
So that their people could see a woman in ministry. And we realized, and on the trip, there were a couple of us from a couple of synods represented, all of whom have partners there. And there were two of us who were ordained women. And each of us preached while we were there in our separate districts. And we realized that it's the first time that a woman had ever preached in any congregation in either of those districts.
Sure.
Right? And hopefully that it won't be the last, because again, the Lutheran Church in Papua New Guinea a year ago approved the ordination of women.
So, years ago, but this could still happen. There'd been a panel, and we had this big discussion about women in ministry, and it'd gone very well, and it was this. And so afterwards, where everybody's gathered around and we're talking, and someone asked a question about having a woman pastor. And this one person spoke up and said, we had a woman pastor one time. And I thought, ooh, neat. And then she said, but it didn't work out, and we'll never have another one. And I don't know what got into me. I didn't miss a beat. And I, in my sweetest voice, said, that's right. But I know an awful lot of male pastors that didn't make it in a congregation. And you know what? The church just kept right on calling male pastors. And meet with call committees. And I kept saying that it was very important for me to be there because they had to face the fact that they might get a woman pastor.
Right.
And so we were able to have those discussions very early on. And it was very hard to hear some say, yes, Pastor Jean, we know, and we are so glad you're there, but we're not ready for one yet. And, but I know that a lot of those same congregations that told me that have now been served by women pastors, and shout thanks for that. So it's been an interesting journey, to say the least. And I think that's the joy part of how that progressed. The sad part is that I know that still happens.
Yes.
In our congregations.
Yes.
And that should not be happening at the 50th anniversary of women in ministry.
Agreed.
It should have never happened, but it should not be happening now. And I don't, all I know is we just keep plugging along. But I want congregations to realize the blessing and what they're missing. I want this church to get braver. You know, the money changers in the temple, that Jesus was there and got angry and loved and cared and taught. And we are called to be with the stranger. We are called to teach. We are called to be at the bedside. And when people try to put the church in little narrow alleys, that's not healthy. That's not what God called us to be. And there are so many of us, so we can reach out and we can do so much more than we're doing. And I'm, please don't misunderstand me. I'm not putting down anything that the church is. I just know that Jesus has called us to be more than and to be bolder. Overwhelmed with the way in which God has blessed my life. And that's not to say it's always been easy, and I didn't expect it to be, but it has been a richer life. Even when I stood with my pastor at age 15, that I could ever imagine the life that I would have serving in the church. I hope that I have been the blessing to others that they've been to me. And I just thank God so much for this privilege, because it really has been an honor.
Jean, you have been a blessing to me. Thank you for your ongoing witness to the power of the gospel. And thank you for your grace and your bold proclamation and reminding us of who we are, who we've been created to be, how we are clothed with the presence of Christ, that God is calling this church to be the people of God, and as you said, not disparaging who we are now, but that we can do and be more, that God has called us to be bold and courageous and brave. And I thank you for your boldness and your courage and your bravery in all the ways that you have served. I'm so thankful and grateful that I have the enormous privilege of being able to serve with you and to be a colleague with you and to learn from you and with you. So thank you.
Be a blessing to one another.
Thank you so much. I'm genuinely privileged. I'm genuinely privileged.